He wasn't some nameless killer hiding in the shadows. He wore a badge, carried a gun, swore an oath to protect and serve, but behind that crisp police uniform lurked a man with terrifying secrets. By day, Anthony Sully was a clean-cut California cop, but by night, he transformed into something far more sinister, a sadistic predator with a hunger for violence. And the place where he carried out his twisted crimes, not a back alley or a remote forest, but a rented hangar right in the middle of town. A place that would become known as the Warehouse of Death. What makes a man cross that line? What flips the switch from protector to executioner? This is the story of Anthony Sully, the cop who turned serial killer, and the shocking spree of torture, murder, and betrayal that followed. Welcome to Death Row Diaries. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because the tale you're about to hear is one you'll never forget. Now let's uncover the horrifying story of Anthony Sully, the ex-cop who turned his hangar into a human graveyard. Anthony John Sully was born on January 2nd, 1944, in the bustling city of San Francisco. Raised in the quiet town of Mill Brae just south of the city, his early life gave little warning of the monster he would become. He graduated high school, got married to a woman named Elizabeth Ann in 1965, and pursued what many considered a noble career path: law enforcement. By 1966, Sully was wearing a badge for the Mill Brae Police Department. For 8 years, he patrolled neighborhoods, issued citations, responded to calls. Just another small-town cop doing his job. His record was clean. His colleagues had nothing bad to say. On paper, he was a textbook officer. But the cracks were already starting to show. Behind closed doors, Sully's first wife was living in fear. In 1969, she filed for divorce, alleging years of physical abuse. That claim might have been swept under the rug at the time, but it was the first official signal that something dark was brewing inside him. And it didn't stop there. Just a few years later, Sully married again, this time to a woman named Donna. But history repeated itself. Donna fled the marriage after just 15 months, seeking legal protection from a man who didn't just hit, he terrified. A restraining order was issued, barring him from going anywhere near her or her child. Why? Because Sully didn't just abuse Donna. He once twisted the heads of her daughter's pet ducklings as a threat. His message was crystal clear. This could be your child next. Let that sink in. He was no longer just a man with anger issues. This was someone capable of calculated, sadistic violence. And yet, no arrest, no scandal, no charges that stuck. Sully quietly left the force in 1974. To the public, he was just another ex-cop moving on. But behind the scenes, his descent into darkness had only just begun. Do you think police officers with violent tendencies are more likely to hide behind their badge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We're reading every one. After walking away from law enforcement, Sully didn't fade into obscurity. Instead, he launched a small business as an electrical and construction contractor. He even rented out a hangar in Burlingame, California, just a few miles south of San Francisco. To outsiders, it looked like just another work site. But in reality, it was about to become a private hell. By the early 1980s, Sully's life had taken a dramatic turn. His obsession with sex, drugs, and power exploded. He started mingling with pimps, drug dealers, and prostitutes. He used the alias Jack when meeting new women. a mask he wore to blend into the underworld he was rapidly embracing. Then came the escort agency.
Sully began pumping thousands of dollars into setting up his own operation. Not a legit business, but a pipeline of vulnerable women he could manipulate. Many of them were runaways, addicts, or desperate for money. And Sully? He was their charming benefactor on the outside, and a violent predator in disguise. He wasn't just a client, he controlled the scene. In that hangar, he created a sick kingdom, a lawless zone where no rules applied. There were no surveillance cameras, no curious neighbors, just concrete walls and a man whose urge to dominate had spiraled completely out of control. This was no longer about sex or money. It was about power, pain, and the twisted satisfaction of watching others suffer. The first known victim was 24-year-old Gloria Fravel, a sex worker who had racked up a $500 debt with Sully's main associate, Tina Livingston. Gloria tried to skip town, but that was a mistake. In February 1983, Livingston and another escort, Keely Angel Burns, tracked her down and delivered her to Sully's warehouse. What followed was pure horror. Gloria refused Sully's sexual advances. In response, he beat her savagely. Then he handcuffed her, suspended her from the ceiling, and began days of brutal torture. Cocaine, sexual assault, psychological torment. Livingston and Burns stayed in another part of the warehouse, complicit in the horror. During one session, Sully looped a hangman's noose around Gloria's neck. She was gagged for most of the ordeal, but at one point managed to free herself and scream. Panicked, Livingston and Burns tried to silence her, but failed. Sully re-entered the room and ended it. He strangled Gloria with a rope. You might think that was the end. It wasn't. Sully and Burns loaded her body into a car, preparing to dump it. But on the drive, something unthinkable happened. Gloria regained consciousness, still clinging to life. Sully pulled over, and with an axe, he finished what he started, crushing her skull by the side of the road. He dumped her body near State Route 35. Days later, a butcher discovered her remains. Sully kept the newspaper article about it, like a trophy. According to people who knew him, he thought it was hilarious that a butcher had found her. That warehouse, it was no longer just a hideout. It had become a killing chamber. If you're still watching, take a second to hit that like button. It helps more people discover chilling cases like this one and keeps us digging into the darkest corners of death row. After Gloria's murder, Sully didn't slow down. He simply got smarter and darker. He asked Tina Livingston to find him another woman, not a sex worker this time, someone young, desperate, and willing to do favors for money. A few days later, she introduced him to Brenda Oakton, a punk rock runaway who occasionally used the name Brenda Rule on the streets. What Brenda didn't know was that she had just signed her own death warrant. Sully brought her to the warehouse, offered her cash, then shot her in the back of the head with a .38 revolver. No warning, no threats, just a cold, calculated execution. But it didn't stop there. Next were Michael Thomas, a 24-year-old pimp with a rap sheet, and his 20-year-old partner, Phyllis Melendez, a sex worker with multiple prostitution arrests. They had some kind of dispute with Sully, so what did he do? He invited them to the warehouse and shot them both in the head. With 3 bodies now decomposing, Sully turned to cleanup mode. He sealed the corpses of Oakton, Thomas, and Melendez in 55-gallon metal drums and filled them with concrete. Then, with help from his accomplices, he dumped them in Golden Gate Park. Just imagine, joggers and dog walkers passing by, never realizing they were just a few feet from a mass grave. The barrels were discovered on April 29, 1983, and Sully, he kept killing like nothing happened. The murders were becoming routine for Anthony Sully. The warehouse wasn't just a hideout anymore. It had become a death factory. And Sully, he was the foreman of his own slaughterhouse. In August 1983, his attention turned to someone from his past, 22-year-old Barbara Searcy, an ex-girlfriend who hadn't heard from him in years. Out of the blue, Sully reached out with what sounded like a lifeline. He offered to help her financially, an invitation that must have sounded like a blessing. But when Barbara arrived at his hangar, there was no conversation, no kindness, no mercy. Sully pulled out his revolver and shot her in the back of the head. It was quick, cold, efficient. And once again, the cleanup was just as calculated as the kill. He wrapped her body in clear plastic sheets and gave all her belongings, including her clothes and purse, to Tina Livingston. Her job? To sneak into Barbara's apartment and delete the message Sully had left on her answering machine, the one inviting her to the warehouse. It was a digital trail that Sully wanted wiped clean. But Livingston couldn't get in, so Sully moved to Plan B. He tied Barbara's body to the back of his car with rope, dragged her through the streets of Woodside, and dumped her near the Pulgas Water Temple, a remote, quiet area where few would stumble upon the remains. But even there, the brutality was evident. Her body was discovered on August 18. At this point, Sully had become fearless, reckless, unhinged, and his next victim would suffer the most savage attack yet. Her name was Catherine Barrett, a 24-year-old drug dealer who thought she was headed to a business deal. She was supposed to sell Sully 6 ounces of cocaine, but when she arrived at the hangar, she was ambushed. This time, Sully wasn't alone. He had a new accomplice, 20-year-old Michael Francis. Together, they pounced on Barrett. She was stabbed 6 times in the chest. Then, as if that wasn't enough, Sully took a sledgehammer and crushed her skull. Her body was stripped, wrapped in plastic bags, and discarded like garbage in the industrial district of South San Francisco. On August 19, just a day after Barbara's remains were found, Barrett's body was discovered. 2 women in 2 days. That's how fast his madness was accelerating. By now, the police had more than a few bodies and even more questions. But it wasn't until they discovered the barrels in Golden Gate Park that everything began to unravel. Inside those drums were the concrete-encased remains of Brenda Oakden, Michael Thomas, and Phyllis Melendez. And on the surface of one of the barrels, fingerprints. Anthony Sully's fingerprints. That was the break investigators needed. They tracked him down and arrested him on August 25, 1983. Once they had him in custody, a full-scale search of his car and hangar began. What they found was a horror show of evidence. The barrels themselves, stolen from a neighboring hangar and traced back to Sully. The rope used to tie Barbara Searcy's limbs, found in Sully's vehicle. Plastic bags with identical defects to the ones wrapped around Michael Thomas, also in his car. Even cigarette butts matched. Benson and Hedges, the same brand and batch found at Catherine Barrett's crime scene. And perhaps most damning of all, concrete handprints imprinted in the very substance Sully used to hide the bodies. But the final nail in the coffin came from within Sully's own trust circle. Tina Livingston, the same woman who helped lure victims, dispose of bodies, and erase trails, flipped. She called the police, confessed everything, and agreed to testify in exchange for a lighter sentence. Her detailed testimony didn't just put Sully at every murder scene, it exposed his accomplices too. Kelly Burns was arrested. So was Michael Francis. Suddenly, Sully's carefully constructed house of horrors was collapsing. In October 1983, Anthony John Sully was charged with 6 murders, but he pled not guilty to every single count, as if he hadn't done a thing wrong. His trial began in early 1986, and from the outset, the evidence was overwhelming. Fingerprints, witnesses, forensics, everything pointed to Sully. The jury didn't take long to decide. On June 3, 1986, Anthony Sully was found guilty on all counts. Just 12 days later, he was sentenced to death. But he wasn't ready to go down quietly. After the verdict was read, Sully stood up and delivered a 40-minute speech in the courtroom, a rambling monologue where he claimed his innocence and tried to cast doubt on every accusation. But no one believed him. Not the jury, not the families of the victims, and certainly not the public. His accomplices met different fates. Tina Livingston, thanks to her cooperation, was only charged with negligent homicide. She served only 3 years and walked free in 1986, having already spent that much time behind bars. Michael Francis, who helped kill Catherine Barrett, was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 25 years. But he became a problem inmate. In 1997, he was convicted of assaulting another prisoner. He's been denied parole multiple times, waived his own hearing in 2020, and remains behind bars. Kelly Burns, convicted in 3 of the murders, was also sentenced to life with parole. After 33 years in prison, she was quietly released in 2016. And Sully? He was transferred to San Quentin State Prison, where he spent nearly 40 years on death row. He filed for commutation in 1991 and again in 2013. He begged for a new trial, but every single appeal was denied. The justice system had heard enough from him. In the end, time did what the courts didn't. Sully's health began to deteriorate from an unspecified form of cancer. He wasted away slowly in his cell until finally, on the morning of September 8, 2023, he died of natural causes at the age of 79. Not by execution, not by justice served, but by disease. The end of his life came with one last mystery. On the morning Sully died, the coroner in Marin County called a man named Kent Nielsen, the only person listed as Sully's emergency contact. That name meant nothing to the media, but to Sully, Nielsen had been a long-lost friend. The two first met back in 1969, when Kent was a teenage gas station attendant servicing Millbrae's police cruisers. Sully was a 25-year-old officer, charming, clean-cut, well-liked. They drifted apart when Sully left the force, but decades later, Kent, out of curiosity, reconnected with Sully at San Quentin in 2002. What followed was strange. They exchanged hundreds of letters and visited regularly over 20 years. Yet beside all those conversations, Kent never asked Sully the question that hung in the air. Why did you kill those people? He said he was sure Sully would have told him, but he never asked. And now, it's too late. Because whatever dark secrets were still hidden behind that badge died with Anthony Sully. Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it wears a badge. If you found this story chilling, hit that like button and subscribe to Death Row Diaries, because we've got more disturbing tales of justice and deception coming your way. Drop a comment below. Do you think Sully would have ever confessed if someone just asked him why? Or was he always going to take the truth to his grave?